Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Profisee's monthly webinar. This month, we'll be discussing making an effective business case for master data management. Leading our presentation today is Bill O'Kane, the VP and MDM strategist here at Profisee. Bill has over 20 years of experience in data governance and MDM and 8 years as a vice president of data and analytics at Gartner. Bill is a recognized thought leader and the world's foremost authority on the topics of information governance and MDM program management, vendors and technologies, and MDM's role within an overall enterprise information management strategy. So without further delay, I will kick it over to Bill for today's presentation.
Thanks so much, Brenna, and thanks to so many of you for showing up today on a Wednesday afternoon where the weather's beautiful here in Atlanta. I hope it is where you are too. What are we going to talk about today? There's a lot of talk about data management business cases out there, and in particular MDM business cases. One of the parts of that I'm the most passionate about is across the thousands of clients I've spoken to as an analyst over the last 8 years and continue to speak with as VP of MDM strategy at Gartner, or excuse me, at Profisee, is one common mistake that about 80% of the people I've spoken to make, even when they believe that they have real viable business case that'll enable them to move forward with master data management. So we're going to talk about what that mistake is and what is the effect that it has and why it's so insidious when, if you read these things by themselves in isolation, they always seem to make sense and seem like something that is quite actionable. It can, however, be avoided by doing just a few things that are usually non-intuitive, particularly to someone in IT, and within that, data architects and database architects and people who do those jobs really well, but often aren't asked to justify large programs such as master data management. So we will go over this non-intuitive technique. It does have some other benefits besides just driving your business case and your program forward. It helps you maximize and even move up delivery of business benefits. It can safeguard your program from internal and external events, say like a merger or an acquisition, or even a sponsor leaving the company or being promoted out of the job of sponsoring MDM and other data management. It can avoid expending unnecessary effort and expense to continually document the same things over and over again in terms of why these things need to take place. And eventually, it can ensure that your program reaches a successful conclusion and then allow you to prove that you actually did what you said you were going to do and reap all the benefits of that. So at Profisee, we have a pretty unique way of looking at the MDM market. We call ourselves the MDM for the 90% vendor. First, what we'll depict here are vendors or prospects or clients that have accomplished the 10% that we call massive data management, sort of tongue-in-cheek, that says they've done it, they were able to sort of justify it somehow, whether on an infrastructure or business outcomes basis. They took the years to do it, whether they bought software or built it, and they believe that they're successful. Everyone we talk to would like to emulate some sort of this behavior to some degree, and we're here to help them do that. But there are some techniques that are agnostic to vendor that will help you along your program management justification journey. So what's stopping them? Again, when companies have a massive data management mandate and not enough budget, not enough resources, and no business case, the smart ones don't do anything because that's not risking their career or the success of their programs. And in essence, they're waiting for a solution to come along. So we've divided the rest of these folks into sort of three categories that I think actually pretty well covers everybody out there. In particularly, I find this diagram sort of helpful on the aspiring and searching side, the upper left and lower right. So on the aspiring side, IT's got a very good vision, maybe even at the architectural level and reference architectural level as to what MDM would do for them and why they would need it and what the efficiencies would be. And we'll get to that more. It usually is around efficiencies. Nothing wrong with that. The bottom right is a business environment where there are a lot of challenges based on data, but nobody sees it as sort of a single monolithic problem, and that's often not incorrect. And we can help address that too with the approach we'll talk about today. And finally, on the lower left are a lot of organizations that just need to deliver something to be successful in their first solution in order to move forward. And again, this technique will help them identify what that first target should be, and then the roadmap for them to actually achieve resolving it. So this is a generally agreed upon statistic. Gartner's written about it a few times as well. 85% of conventionally justified MDM programs fail due to justifications that are logical and correct, but they have a fatal flaw that has one of two effects. The first effect is, I always say this is the second worst thing that can happen to you, is that you make a pitch for MDM based on sort of a data-centric set of use cases or data itself, data quality itself, which we'll come back to. And someone comes along and pitches something that seems simpler and easier to do, like buying a CRM application or even an ERP or a customer data platform outside of MDM, and you don't get your money. And you go back to what you were doing with your day job. And the good news is, the reason that's only the second worst thing is that you still do get to go back to your desk to what you were doing and what you hopefully enjoy. A worse outcome is actually that you get that funding for the first year, and the business or whoever it is actually funds you as in the role of stakeholder, and then you go back at the end of the year, you do everything you intended to do in terms of infrastructure and preparation for integration, and all of a sudden the stakeholders want to have that business discussion with you, only it doesn't sound like, gee, this, you know, what are you going to give to us for all this money, time, and effort? It's, what did you do with all that money we gave you? And what about all these things that did not get to take place because people were working on your MDM program? And you know, that's not the way, obviously, you want to have that discussion. The substance of that discussion is actually okay. It's just the timing and tenor of it that you want to avoid. The idea is to have this discussion before any funding is allocated, rather than having them ask you what you did with all that money again. What will we get instead is where you want to go, is what will we get for all this time, money, and effort? And again, you have to be sure you can deliver it, but it's all about the timing of the discussion. It's having it before a tremendous outlay of time, money, and resources. And again, as we said on the last slide, this will also help provide a buffer against disruption by both internal organizational events and external events like a merger and acquisition. So the number one reason for MDM failure is either the business case doesn't exist, but that's also not that's not the only reason. You actually can have a business case, but it can be the wrong one, and that's really where I want to go today. You know, people know when they don't have a business case. What they're less able to identify, specifically from IT, is if they have one that isn't going to be successful. And again, I've been able to notice a pattern over the years of business cases that look great on the outside and everybody kind of thinks that's going to work, and then a year later they really don't. And we've had a statistic in our own experience that 63% of projects that go down this route will actually fail in terms of, and an MDM failure is not like a data warehousing failure where people just don't use what you produced. It's actual stopping of the program, rolling back of whatever you've done so far, and in essence, going back to what you were doing before after spending a fairly significant amount of money. So there are some usual suspects of dysfunctional business cases. Those of you that I've talked to in the past have heard me say this. It's sort of the big four. When I ask someone why they want to do MDM or what their business case is for doing MDM, I usually hear one of four things, and I'll start with the most obvious to the least obvious. The first one is better data quality, followed by better decisions, followed by, and now we're getting more and more real and common, single version of the truth, and finally, the current favorite, the 360-degree view of the customer. Every once in a while, you'll hear a 360 view of something else, like product or asset, but customer is by far the most commonplace of all the data domains today. There's nothing wrong with any of these as sort of architectural concepts or intermediate goals to pursue, but they are not the final business goal. These are all something you do in order to get something else, in other words. Often my technique with my clients is, if I gave you that 360-degree view tonight, let's not talk about the fact that we don't know what it would contain yet, which is the other symptom, but let's say we did and I gave it to you tonight. What would you do differently tomorrow morning? That's where the real business case needs to go in terms of adding value and generating new and improved outcomes. So those are the four common ones. Again, we don't want to do this. It's okay to have them, just don't have them be your end business case. Think of, again, what you would do with these if you had them. This is the how. You want to get to the what and why. I brought up for the first time in this webinar what I call dishonorable mention to an up-and-comer. I've actually had a discussion just today around this. Monetize our data. And so my first question is always, let's clarify our terms. What do you mean by that? One person may say, just get financial business benefit out of managing our data better. Another person may say, sell our data. That's actually the formal definition is get our data to such a point where it is so valuable that it's valuable outside of our organization and we can begin to trade it for assets or sell it as part of barter type business processes. This is an excellent concept. You certainly better have your master data under control and well managed and well governed if you would intend to do that. There's nothing that will cause litigation faster than selling someone data that's not right and not clean. However, again, this suffers from the same sort of malady as the previous slides use cases. Without specific use cases, you will incur the same risks of failure as the ones on the previous slide, or worse if this is the only thing you have going as a justification. That's often something that organizations will use, monetize your data, because they just didn't think they needed to take the time to do anything else. And again, if that's all you're doing, A, you better have a good definition, and B, you better have some specific ways you will know if you did that successfully. That's another thing to think about quite a bit is how will I prove this after I've done it? We'll come back to that in just a bit. But this is not only about moving things forward and ensuring success, it's about being able to prove it after the program has reached critical mass. I would sum all this up to this point by saying the means to an end is not the same as an end. The how is not the same as the what or the why. So we're going to stop here and we're going to do a quick poll. We have quite a few attendees here as we did last time. We've actually got a record number. So we would like to give you one of the first of two polling questions if you wouldn't mind taking a few seconds to answer. All right, thanks everybody. Thanks very much for the prompt responses. So let's talk about how to do this. How do we get to business cases that will work and be manageable over the long haul and bring us to a successful and provable conclusion? First is a technique I've used over the years. It just sort of occurred to me one day, and it seems to work for a lot of people, and it's a good indicator of where you are on this curve. Try to state the reasons you want to do MDM without saying MDM, which everybody knows as a technique, but I would extend it to say, try to do it without even saying data. So, what is it you want to do? Try not to say the word data. And I have found most organizations that I start there with have difficulty doing this, and it's a good thing. The earlier you catch this, the better. This is an excellent indicator that you're not where you need to be in terms of understanding the connection between MDM and data management and business value. So here's an example. The next thing that someone always asks me is, can you give me an example of that? Well, increase customer onboarding rate while reducing error rate and have targets for that. Two things I would point out here. It doesn't say data, for starters, but also it doesn't state dollars, and we'll come back to that briefly in just a minute. There's often a big hesitation on the part of stakeholders to attach dollars to anything in terms of savings because they're afraid that money will be taken from their budgets, or even more egregious, they may have to lay off people if they start saving a lot of time and resource effort. So this doesn't contain dollars. Often what I call operational KPIs are actually sufficient. So if I do this is an operational KPI that can be verified. It doesn't have money attached to it. Someone could come back and do that later. But that's the important thing here is, how is this helping me? And again, I'm not referring specifically to data. I often tell the anecdote, one of the most successful MDM programs I ever managed to completion was called 21st Century Account Opening. And again, you can see what that's about. It involved MDM. MDM was most of it, not all of it, but the business stakeholders had no idea MDM was even involved. And they wouldn't have talked about data if you asked them what they got out of it. They would talk to you about how smoothly their operations were running. Reduce slack in new product introduction cycle by X%. So the first one is sort of customer MDM centric. This one obviously is product MDM centric, and it's pretty typical in a product MDM or even a PIM solution. One of the first things someone will say is, I have several systems that need to manage this data in sequence or in parallel or both during a product introduction process, and I discovered that a lot of that turns into slack while systems and actors are waiting for upstream products to be sent their way. We're going to use this system to sort of reduce that and maybe even eliminate it. On the asset management side, we see definitely an uptick in asset MDM, such as heavy parts, railway, trucking, things like that. And we just want to increase the uptime by X%. We've actually had a client here at Profisee that approached us with all kinds of data quality problems, saying they just using all the 4 offenders on the previous slides for business cases, and it actually turned out that this was their main goal, was to increase their asset uptime on all their heavy equipment. So again, it can be lurking underneath all the things you think you need to do. The key is to boil them down to these things that, again, as an indicator, don't specifically refer to data. If you can't do this, again, we have a red flag, which means we should sort of stop it and take stock and get to this any way we can. And if we can't, again, it may be time to seek outside help, for example, from even an MDM vendor like Profisee or a consulting partner to help you through this. Because, again, this is critical. If you bypass this, your risk of failure just went up sort of geometrically. So another way I help clients characterize business benefits is this sort of, everybody loves a quadrant, and so do I. You'll see that the y-axis is basically your typical accounting above the line, below the line paradigm. So above the horizontal axis is making new money, below it is saving money. To the left of the vertical axis is current things you do currently, but you're not good at. So you might, again, do customer onboarding or employee onboarding, and you're okay, but you're not good at it, and it's error prone, and there's a lot of rework. But in general, it's inefficient or suboptimal. On the right side are things you can't do at all. So good examples of this are cross-selling and upselling. We'll revisit that in a minute. The reason I like this is because it says a lot of things that sort of resonate with my experiences throughout the years. That is, if you give, and I was the worst offender at this, so nobody get angry for me saying this, but in the lower left, if you give a good IT architect a problem or a capability, they'll generally stick to the lower left of this. They will try to save money by optimizing something that's broken or suboptimal or inefficient in some other way. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a real benefit. That's real money. That's real time. But in general, that's not enough to pay for an MDM program of any typical size. So what we usually try to do is get people to think more into the upper right. Now, that's more difficult for a couple of reasons. One is there are net new processes involved. We want them to make us new money. So again, cross-selling and upselling, if it's legal to do so and possible to do so across product lines or customer business silos, or even full lines of business, that's a very popular, powerful use case that pushes MDM into positive territory. And I should nuance this a little by saying it's quite common to start in the lower left and learn all the capabilities of a piece of MDM software and then take advantage of them by moving to the upper right. So again, we're looking at IT-driven enhancements towards the lower left, but as you move towards the upper right, you need, again, to be able to think out of the box. And for that reason, this is where business IT collaboration becomes critical. Very few times have I seen IT alone in a room actually get to a net new processes that makes the company more money. The most difficult thing about any of this is that the business may have trouble or may not have the mindset to do this. And in that case, there are still a few choices. I've often advised people, a lot of my clients have gone outside for help to consulting firms, either SIs or boutique firms, and that can be just an awesome way of jump-starting and finding out what your competitors are doing, because again, just because you're not doing something doesn't mean it's not being done. And oftentimes it is being done, and it's being done using MDM as sort of the glue between all of these new and improved processes. Another technique I use is to use what are called SMART goals. If anybody here is involved with HR or interacts with them on a regular basis, you know that they use a tool often called the SMART tool. And you can look it up on Wikipedia, but it's another way of verifying if you have real business goals for your MDM program. Does it target specific areas? That's often not too much of a problem, at least within the technical landscape for IT. Is it measurable though? How would I know? How would I know if you did that? How would I know if your data quality was better? How would I know if you were making better decisions? How would I know something's a single version of the truth? How would I know I've got the full 360 view? That's often very hard to do, and that's a good indicator. If I can't measure this and prove I did it, again, that's a red flag, or at least a yellow one. Assignable, again, is it discrete enough to give it to a person or a group of people and have them deliver it? Is it realistic? Is it actually something that can be done? Again, make our data perfect is another one. We want to remove all data errors is an example I use that violates this. Is it time related? Can I ever finish it? Now, we always argue that MDM probably never gets finished, but in a data domain by a use case, it can be. So if I'm out to, again, to improve slack time for introducing a product or increase my customer onboarding rate at the same time as I reduce the errors, I can put a date by which I'm going to measure that and I'll know I did it. So again, if you find difficulty in doing any of these things, take pause and look at what you're doing and see if you don't need to drive this up to another sort of business related level like we have been using the examples of. So we talked about financial value a little bit ago. Attaching financial value to the above is the best scenario, but if you can get workflow metrics like operational KPIs, those are also effective if dollars are a sensitive issue. And again, we often run into this as an issue. I often have is that, I'm with you all the way up to the dollars. I'm not going to commit to any dollars because the way my organization works, a portfolio manager is going to come back to me and ask me for names of people I can lay off or just budget money I can give back if nothing else, and I'm not really too anxious to do that. So, I understand that. Most of the people in this space understand that as well. The other thing to look at, and it also plays into the business use case scenarios, is this: are you stopping at analytical MDM? So analytical MDM, for those that would like a definition, is MDM in the service of reporting or analytics environments like data warehouse, the things you probably all know, data warehouses, data marts, predictive analytics platforms, anything there, even a customer data platform for analytics for marketing, for example. So if all we're doing is using MDM to supply data to those things, that's great. It probably has benefits. But real MDM implementations that are really transforming companies are then pushed into what we call the operational MDM realm. And that's everything outside of analytics. That onboarding process probably has a new pop-up window that tells me whether someone's a duplicate or whether I'm entering data for someone I already know about that's different than what we already had, and helping me make the decision about whether it's better or not. There is some affinity between analytical MDM and batch processing, so you'll often, although not 100% of the time, find analytical MDM supporting batch processes in terms of data integration. The other scenario or use case, operational MDM, tends to have an affinity, as you might expect, since I referenced batch for analytical, for real-time or near real-time integration with source and target systems. So this is where things like, if you're really doing this sort of an industrial strength way, something like an enterprise service bus might also be coming in. It's not uncommon for MDM and enterprise service buses to be developed in tandem to get you things like canonical XML schema formats for things like customer and product, and even transactions and interactions. So again, if you're trying to look for viable, powerful business scenarios, often I've found that the analytical ones are harder to quantify. They're definitely there, but they're harder to sell in terms of being measurable, for example, as I referred to on the SMART goals. And operational MDM, generally, if you're having trouble especially, will tip your business case into positive territory, provided, again, that you can get someone to ratify that with you. And we'll get back to that in a minute. We are now, again, for the reasons I stated before, we're going to do one more final poll question. If everybody would be so kind as to respond as soon as they can, that would be great. Thank you so much. Okay, thanks very much, everybody. Okay, so we're looking past that concept. So, what is it that you need to do now? What can I do with all of this disturbing and helpful information? First thing is, as I referred to a couple of times in the slides here, identify some sort of framework that helps you through this. So if you work in a large enterprise, chances are you have some kind of ROI model that you may have to use eventually, even if it's not what you use to formulate the benefits. So it was quite common for our clients to say, yes, in the large enterprise space, say, yes, we have something. It's very big and hard to use, and we have to engage a lot of people in finance in order to go through the process. Do you have something? And we do. We have something called the Business Impact Roadmap, or BIR, at Profisee, that's quite good, that helps people, and we share it with them for free. We can take them through it. We have a couple people that do this full-time here as well. So we have a framework. There are others. But it's quite common for people to sort of put off the use of their corporate ROI model because, again, it can be big, it can be very detailed, difficult to use, and it's just not worth the time and trouble. And again, often you have to engage formally a finance process that can slow you down as well. And particularly in data management programs, speed and time are usually of the essence. So you might have an internal ROI, as I said. You might even have tools. That's one option, even though, again, many people elect to either go around it or put it off. Consulting firms and software vendors such as Profisee, we have one. A lot of consulting vendors do too. There are actually consulting firms for MDM and other data management that's really all they want to do. They want to come in and they want to help you with the justification, and then they leave. That's their specialty. Or they have a practice contained in a larger practice. Use this same, whatever the framework is, connect the benefits of MDM to some larger initiative that you may have going on. So popular ones are one customer on the sort of abstract side. We want to have one experience throughout this enterprise, customer experience driven, and the CRM is not going to be enough to make that work because for one thing, it'll let you create duplicates of all your customers, even if it's a brand new system. Same thing with an ERP system. Business apps in general are not very good at managing data. That's not what they're made to do. So, it's no secret or surprise that some of the biggest selling MDM vendors are actually also ERP and CRM vendors. So that's why, is because they tend to let data problems and technical debt accumulate, and then they have a way to solve it. Our approach is to prevent it from happening. We can still solve it as they do, but we prefer to espouse these and promote these approaches that prevent it from happening in the first place. It could be also as simple as just needing to implement a new ERP. If that's the case, then data management will almost certainly play into it. The only difference is if you don't do something like MDM and you do something like an ERP implementation, you'll do all the work and then you'll end up throwing it out, and the ERP will do to your new data exactly what it was doing to your old data, and within a month or two, your cleaned up ERP data is going to look like the old ERP's data, almost exactly in terms of data quality levels and semantic adherence. Finally, validate the metrics, validate what you come up with in terms of business case with stakeholders, particularly in the business, if not solely within the business, particularly within the business, as to, yes, we all agree this is what's important. They are more important than the things we put off to the side in the parking lot. We're not going to let any of those come back or any new ones show up without some sort of additional justification like we went through for these. We'll agree on the events that will cause us to come back here and take a look, which we'll talk about next. If we have an acquisition or a merger, we're going to come back and make sure all of this is still valid. If we had four discrete business case scenarios in our current document and we acquire somebody or somebody acquires us, we may want to go back, and maybe one or two of them is not as valid as something else we will want to do now. But the point is that we now have a process whereby we're going back and we're looking at how we decided to do things and whether those things are still in effect. And again, that the effectiveness even of that is predicated on the fact that everybody who needed to validated that what we had initially was correct and workable. And again, as I alluded to a second ago, revisit all this. People often put maturity models in front of me and ask me, where are we? And then finally, what's the difference between a level 4 and a level 5 on the maturity curve, CMMI and others? And for me, in plain English, a level 5 is a level 4 that keeps looking back and making sure that they're still on point. I've unfortunately seen many organizations that have really, really great business cases that are 18 months or 2 years old, and they have no idea if any of it's still valid. They don't even know what they've delivered because they never bothered to go back and take the credit, and they're still sort of working away at whatever the next deliverable they've arrived at is, and they don't even know if it's in the document. So again, that's sort of one of the level 5 maturity indicators for me. And so again, anything you do here, make it a living document, a living artifact that gets revisited. And I hope you do, if you have a data governance organization, and if the business is either owning it or heavily involved, this is one of the things that should be on their charter, is they should actually be the ones that are in charge of going back and making sure things are getting done, or if they're getting dropped, that they're getting dropped sort of consciously and not just passively. And again, hopefully, if you've talked to me before, I have a lot of suggestions, which we'll go through in detail in a future webinar, about what the data governance organization's remit is. To me, that organization has a budget and it follows a program management model, more like other program management models, where we get together every couple of months and we make sure that things are still on point and on feel for where we want to go. And if they're not, why not? Do we need to make a course correction? Do we need to get off of what we initially stated as a direction towards something that makes a little bit more sense for us now and that maybe didn't a while back? So with that, I'm going to turn back to look if there are any questions here. There usually are. Okay, so again, we have one general one, and it's a good one, and it's probably one of the hardest ones, is, what if I can't get my business partners to think like this? What if I can't get them to ratify even the thinking that I'm doing? How do I get around that? And I tried to mention that a little bit ago. I'll go through it a little bit in more detail here. That is a very tough question. If you're an IT person particularly, that's a hard thing to get around. I've had people say things to me like, we're not entrepreneurial, we don't think outside the box, we're pretty sure others are in our space, but what do we do about that? And it's like changing your basic DNA. It's very difficult and challenging to do. My suggestion for a lot of them was try somehow to do it yourself. And when I working here at Profisee and prior to this in my prior roles, I often got involved, one-on-one with clients, helping them through this process. And I would even more suggest, again, bring in some other outside help, somebody that's in your industry, that's helping your competitors. They'll be more than happy to help you. Again, it will cost money, but I'll tell you in the long run that it actually pays, obviously, big dividends to do that, not just for MDM, but for anything. And listen to them. Don't just write them off. That's another common thing, is to bring people in and have them tell you things you don't want to hear, and then brush them off. But again, this is a critical thing. If the choice is between stopping or trying to get your stakeholders into this headspace, I would actually recommend stopping, because what you'll do is, as we alluded to earlier, you'll spend a lot of money. You may get one or two things accomplished, but it generally isn't seen in a positive light by the business as a whole by the time you're finished, and you'll have done a lot of work around that. I have another question. Whether I've seen business case based on cost per bad record. I have. I've seen good ones and bad ones. They both kind of make me nervous, because again, it's based on a data quality metric. And again, we should have this even if it's not based on it. You should definitely have this. To me, it falls in the same line as duplication rates, even if the data is good. But I don't want to put words in the questioner's mouth, so I'm going to go straight to this. So the first thing is, if you can define, the answer is, this is okay, if you can define what a bad record is and then get everybody to agree what the downstream effects of that bad record are and what it costs them, either in operational KPI metrics or even better in money. And I've always struggled to get people to sort of own up to that. That's kind of where I would leave that. So it's perfectly okay to do it if, again, the business impact is measured, and go back to the SMART goals, measurable and repeatable, and you can get the stakeholders to agree that that's a problem and that that's what the cost is. Then certainly, then it becomes a business use case. If it's just bad data, my first test will be, can anybody define what that bad record, what makes a record bad? And that's probably a pretty complex and multi-part answer. But if we can't do that, I would sort of hang back until I could. So I hope that helps. We have the next one. Sure. So the question reads, can we have a specific example of benefit logic from deliverable to solid financial benefit? So every company out there that I've dealt with that wants to master customer data, they can tell you what every new customer costs them and makes them in the first 3 months generally. So that's how they get to next best action. All of that sort of customer experience stuff, they start with how much it costs them to onboard and what the error rate is that causes them to have to go back to the customer. So I've actually dealt with somebody in the last couple of weeks that said, we've proven that if we don't have to rework, let me put it in a negative way, if we have to revisit a customer to rework master data that didn't get entered properly, the odds of that customer churning are actually sort of 40 to 50% higher. And I'm not going to be exact because this was an informal conversation, but that's an example where they said, we know that if we can get them going without revisiting them, that we stand, a 60% chance that they're going to stay with us for a long time. And their definition of a long time, I think, was 2 years. So again, they were able to quantify that, put dollars to it by using the average purchase within the first 6 months of purchases. They had all that down. Another one is, I'm going to give you a very weird one. It's actually the largest business case I ever had for doing MDM was they figured out that the customer, the client in particular, had figured out that their customer service rep turnover was costing them millions, and I'm not going to give you the exact figure, but millions and millions a year, well into 8 figures in turnover to do retraining, and they had it down to making the new nameplates for the cubicles in the call center every time somebody left. And it was quite a lot of money. And so, they said the turnover rate was about 41, 42%. And almost everyone that left, this was in a town where there was really only one other employer that was deemed viable. And we were actually considered the better one. And when people left, they would say, no, the money's good, food's good in the cafeteria. I like the person in the cubicle next to me. But I'm tired of customers yelling at me because it takes 45 minutes to change their address if they move on all the products they bought for us. And I'm tired of getting yelled at, and I should be yelled at because that's terrible service. And so I sat down with the person running the call center, and he already had quantified numbers of what the cost of that was. He said, turnover in this industry is not that great. It's usually 18 or 19%. Ours is 41. And I don't expect you to get it down to 18 or 19 because we have other problems. But if you can for every percentage point you lower that, I will sign up for $3 million in annual benefit. And his joke was, I know all about what the benefits of this would be because I get yelled at about it every quarter. So again, that's the largest one. It wasn't on anybody's sort of plan going in, and we kind of stumbled onto it in the call center. But again, you have to think outside the box and look for problems. And once we got the stakeholder rolling on that, the only other thing he said to me was, of course you have to deliver this. I get what you're saying. We're going to end up with one laptop on everybody's desk instead of the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. And we're going to integrate this in a way that they'll only have to input the data once, and it'll go to every one of the dozens of systems we have that handle customer data here. So again, that's a pretty straightforward but unusual one. I hope that's helpful. Another good question, what needs to be in place prior to even putting together a business case for MDM? Data roles in places, data governance council. So both of those are important. Data roles, I'm going to say stewards, and data governance council. Both of those should be in the business. I would actually, and this is sort of my view in my prior roles, it's pretty provocative, I realize. If you don't have a business case, even designated, getting people to participate in data governance and data stewardship, for example, or even data maintenance on things they're not doing now is risky. You're not justifying why you're asking people to do things either instead of or in addition to what they're doing now. And you have to take into account, boy, I'm glad someone asked this question. You have to take into account the fact that the way things are working now, more times than not, are actually making money. You're in a company that, unless you're losing money and really going down the tubes, and if that's the case, you're probably not even thinking about this stuff necessarily. But let's say you're a fairly going concern, you're looking to innovate and grow, or even just innovate on the efficiency side, like I said before. What I always suggest people start out with is, how do we prove that the way things are done now is not optimal, that they could be done better? Not that that they couldn't be made better no matter what, but that there's an amount of expenditure we could put out there that would be worth it. So in other words, we don't want to spend $5 million to fix a $1 million inefficiency. But if there's a way we can do that for $250,000, it bears taking a look at. I say all of that to say that my belief is, based on what I've seen over the last 10 or 15 years, is even that requires a business case. Even getting people to step up to those roles and not just empower them, but again, justify why they're there and make sure that everybody understands that. Just as important as MDM technology and the program and the data itself, maybe more important is the understanding of why we're doing anything at all, including data governance. And by the way, I know I didn't say this, you should never do MDM without data governance, and you shouldn't do governance without MDM. They're not exactly the same thing. They're each parts of the other. I could probably do a whole webinar just on that at some point. But again, I know it sounds sort of radical and terse, but I view governance sort of in the same way as MDM. In fact, you could take this presentation and put governance everywhere it says MDM, and I would still stand by it pretty much. So I hope that's helpful. Probably not what you wanted to hear, and it's a purist point of view. I would definitely agree to that. But again, this is just as important to those new roles and responsibilities that you would create is what's the reason we're doing this. because again, in the absence of that, or in the absence of what we've seen here today, I've seen them fail just because of that, and not because of any other reason. We have one more, I think. If going through an ERP implementation, what have you, there's always at least two of these. What have you seen for ideal timeline? So that's a really good question. It's asked in a better way than it usually is. Usually is how long is this going to take me and what's it going to cost? And my response to that is that's like asking how long a piece of string is. But it was asked here in a better way. It's sort of relative to the ERP. I'm going to answer that in a bunch of ways that may not seem connected. So the first thing is, in order to move from one ERP to another, you're going to have to rationalize all the data, not just the master data. You could take sort of the lightweight approach that just maps the old data to the new data, doesn't really attempt to clean it up. And that might even be, I don't want to assume that that's not a viable option for someone. Generally, it's not, but it could be if your data in that ERP is relatively okay from a quality standpoint. It could be mostly mapping, and you could decide just move it up, and then if you're going to clean it up later. So that's sort of the lightweight ERP implementation. But if you have a bunch of other things, like 6 ERP instances that are going into one, and none of them are related to each other, even by semantics, that's a good question. So you're going to do a lot of the MDM prep anyway, even if you don't call it MDM. In that case, if the MDM vendor or the ERP vendor actually has an MDM solution, it gets a little easier because they can advise you how that's generally used. SAP is a good example of that. They have a very tightly integrated MDM solution to their ERP, and many people find it just better to use those screens because there are more data-centric business rules that can be applied in that environment than in the ERP environment, and it works for them. So that would affect the length of time and the expenditure and all that. That would be somewhat less. If there's heterogeneous vendors in play, like somebody else besides the ERP vendor, and you want something more open, like a Profisee, for example, it can both take shorter or longer. So shorter if you decide that if you're able to sort of ably pick out that subset of attributes that are master attributes, you can restrict your master data model in that other tool to just those attributes and just work on those for the initial deliverable. The bigger tools tend to mirror the data models of the ERPs they support, and they don't really put up with sort of partial population. So you don't necessarily get that option. But you're going to end up starting before you do the implementation anyway, just to get the data cleaned up, and according to what the rules are, they would be the same. Depending on how heavy and what type of, whether it's an ADM thing with the ERP vendor, that should be shorter, I would think. And the vendor will make up with that with how much the software costs. Generally, if it's something that could be done pretty easily by them with a tool, that tool is going to be not nominal in cost. Or you could choose a more open MDM solution like a Profisee, for example, and model just the identified master data, and you'd probably finish before the ERP was ready to go live. So again, I hope that's helpful. That was an excellent way to ask that question, by the way, whoever asked it. Wonderful contextualization. Should MDM reside in an ERP or outside it? So I'm going to add on to my previous answer having to do with ERPs and CRMs and how business apps are really bad at managing data. I often get questions where people say, can't I just point at my ERP and clean up all the data in there and have it be the master for customer or for product? And the answer is you can do that, but these tools are there to manage interactions and transactions. ERPs manage transactions, maybe a little interaction. CRMs are there to manage customer interactions. That's what they do. But you asked about ERPs. So they can be done. So, I'll take this all the way to the left-hand side of the spectrum. MDM could be a 5-page data entry procedures document that says, don't create duplicates. Search this database first. I call that swivel chair integration. Search this database first, and then go in and enter based on whatever you find or don't find in the second system. That will actually work for a while. The paradox is that if it works, eventually you're going to grow, and that's not going to scale. People are going to start saying, look, I can't keep searching this database. I've got too many of these things. I'm just going to start entering them. And lo and behold, now you have duplicates. And you have to get them cleaned up some way. So the answer usually is the next thing you can do is sort of put a technical solution in place, whether it belongs to the ERP vendor or not, that enforces all those rules automatically. That's a very simplified way of saying that. So even if you can get an ERP to do things like data quality validations that are usually pretty scalar. You know, surname has to be at least 1 or 2 bytes. But that they'll be able to do that. You'll run out of room to do that eventually in the ERP. Typically, the tipping point when someone needs MDM in that scenario is when someone says, oh, you know what, we got really good at this. We came up with a business rule that says, in order for me to figure out what the best email address for a customer is, or a contact at a customer, I have to check 5 other systems and their update timestamps to figure out if I have the most recent version of something. That's an MDM validation. That's something that if you go to an ERP vendor with that and they sell an MDM tool, the next thing they say to you is going to be, guess what you need? And they're right, but it might not be theirs. Again, if you wanted to stay open and keep your data model down to whatever level you actually require, you do that with an outside and external MDM tool like a Profisee, again, for example. So again, ERP can do it. That's if you're going to do it, my advice is, you know, view it as a short-term tactical solution that will, if you're successful, actually won't work forever or for very long. The faster you grow based on getting all this stuff cleaned up, the faster those business outcomes are actually occurring, the sooner you're going to have to do something that's automated. And again, hope that helps. And I think, somebody, oh, you're welcome. Thanks very much. I'll turn it back over to Brennan now.
Thank you everyone again for joining us today, and thank you to Bill for hosting. So let's have everyone be on the lookout for our next webinar hosted by Bill that is going to focus on varying your MDM architectures across data domains and time for maximum business impact. So stay tuned for more info there, and thanks again for joining us today. Everyone have a great rest of your day.